So we are ending the book of Philippians today. We have been going, I'm trying to stress to you the difference between happiness and joy. Happiness is circumstance dependent. When things are going well, we feel good. It's an emotion, we feel good. It's not that joy isn't emotion, but joy produces emotion. Happiness comes when things are good and then leaves when things are bad. But joy is different. Joy is a choice first to celebrate, not woo, going around going woo, but to choose to see the good that God is doing despite what our circumstances tell us, because we know Jesus is present in our lives and in our circumstances, and that he has the resources to be able to deal with whatever comes our way, and he promises that he will use our circumstances, whether they're really fun or they're really difficult, he will use them to create in us godliness and faithfulness and good. And so that's why people can say, that's why James says, when you're in trouble and you're struggling, rejoice. Not like, ignore it all and pretend like it isn't there, but rejoice because Jesus is with you and he's doing something in your life. And so choose to focus on that, not the difficulty of your circumstances. And so Paul, who writes Philippians in jail, writing the letter of joy, even his own place of writing is instructive to us. That if he, while he's in jail, being falsely accused, can write a letter of joy, well, then maybe we can live a life of joy. And we went through various chapters, and each one kind of had a different focus on how we focus on joy. And the last one is, chapter 4, is joy in adversity. Now, I know this isn't going to apply to you because none of you face adversity, but I got to finish the book, so just bear with me as we go through. And Paul will talk about 3 different things. I don't know if he planned it this way or is it just the way life works out, but all 3 of these things are very common to us. Look, therefore, verse 1, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love, and I long to see you. Here in prison, I think of you, and I long to see you. My joy, my crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. Now, I plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche. These are 2 leaders in the church at Philippi. To be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, I ask you, my true companion, help these women since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are written in the book of life. So Euodia and Syntyche are having trouble. They're in conflict. I know that's unusual for 2 people to be in conflict in the church, but it happens every once in a while. And perhaps you are in some sort of conflict, maybe with your parents, maybe with your siblings, maybe with your children, maybe with your boss, maybe with your employee, maybe with the person driving next to you on the 404. I don't know, maybe your neighbor. I mean, conflict is rather common in our lives, is it not? And there's 2 things that Paul says to these 2 women who are really having a hard time getting along. He says to them 2 things. 1, he goes, agree in the Lord. And 2nd, he says to them, to my true companion, whom he doesn't name, help these 2 women get along. And so he says, agree in the Lord and get help. Well, that's not profound. It's just hard to do. When I can remember clearly, when our boys were smaller, and we have a round table, and we would sit around, and Crystal bought the round table to produce conversation, and it works. And so we were around the table, and one of the boys spilled the water. He was reaching for something, spilled the water. And then I kind of went off on him, and I'm like, how, smarten up, watch what you're doing, da-da. And in the middle of my tirade, Crystal went, it's only a cup of water. Which is to say, what's really important, Ed? Is this cup of water and spilling it really worth you taking a strip off your son? I mean, it's a cup of water. Focus on what's important, not what's personal. See, personally, I was probably under stress, and I just let it go, and I took out whatever I was going through on him. But that's not what's important. The water is not what's important. It's him. It's our family. It's our unity. It's building him up. And so Paul's saying to Euodia and Syntyche, like, you guys have labored in the Lord to lead people to faith. You got it going on there. And you're going to argue over this? What's really most important? What's really most important? So in your conflict, maybe that's a good question to ask. What's really most important in my conflict with this other person? Is it being right? Is it getting my way? Is it being justified? Or is it making sure we don't cause division in our family, in our church? Is it our relationship? Is it resolving? What is most important? Ask yourself that in the conflict. And then aim for that goal. And Paul clearly is like, the gospel is far more important. The church is far more important than any disagreement you two can have. You need to figure it out. And he goes, and by the way, figuring it out, here's my second option I would say to you. Yes, I ask you, my true companion. Now, he doesn't name that person. He says, I ask you to help these two women since they have been a force for the gospel in Philippi. Now he's pulling some advice that comes from Jesus right out of Matthew chapter 18. And so Matthew chapter 18 tells us how to deal with conflict with one another. It says, if your brother or sister sins, in other words, if they have done something that hurt you or bothers you, go and point out their fault. Now, if you can get over it, if somebody insults you or hurts you or says something, but you can say, I'm just going to forgive them and move on. That's fine. You can do that. You don't have, but if you can't get rid of it and it's affecting your attitude toward them and you're talking about them to other people, then you can't get over it. And so Jesus says, you go to your brother or sister, you point out the problem between the two of you, and if they listen to you, you won them over, and it's all done. You don't go talk to other people. That's what we normally do, right? Somebody hurts us, somebody does something we don't like, and so we go, blah, 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 and we expand the conflict. That is called sin, called triangulation. It's called sin. That is sin. When you're I just have to talk to somebody. Yes, you do. The person you're having trouble with. Now, I'm not standing here talking like, look, I do this right all the time. I find myself doing that because I want relief from the tension I feel inside. So I want to get help by going to somebody else and talking to them about that person because it makes me feel better. The only problem is it's sin. S-I-N. Sin. If you truly need help, then go to somebody who's disconnected from that person, your relationship and your family or your church, and say, okay, this is what happened. I think this is what I should do. What do you think? That's onside. But we rarely don't do that. We just talk. And we don't talk to the right person. But Jesus says, go to them directly, and then you'll win them over. Probably, okay, I'm just making this stat off the top of my head, but I know it's a lot. 80% of conflicts solved right there, maybe even higher. But if they will not listen to you, take one or two others along, so that in every matter may be established by the testimony of two or three witnesses. So you got a problem, you can't work through it, you gone to the person, then go get somebody or two somebodies who that person would accept as good for, that they can trust. You don't bring your two best friends. You bring people who that person would trust and who that person will accept counsel from. And you bring them and you talk about it in front of them. Get help. That's what Paul's talking about. You guys can't get it together, so then get somebody in there that will be able to help the two of you. There's a third step. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as their tax collector. See, this is where the witnesses come in, because the witnesses may say, no, this is not something that needs to go to the elders. You two need to deal with this. We'll work it out. Or they might go, you know what, there's a sin here, and it needs to be dealt with. This person isn't dealing with it, so we're going to take it to the elders. This rarely happens because we rarely do this process. But we would rescue one another if we did. Now, it's not always this formal, because Connie came into my office, this was years ago, and she said, I'm done. She was a young mom with young kids, and she goes, we're just done. We've been struggling for months and months and months, and we just can't seem to get a grip on it, and I can't take it anymore. My husband can't take it anymore. I think the only thing that we can do is just, we're going to part ways and split our stuff and the kids and start new lives. And so I said to her, Connie, I said, well, are you willing to get help? Now, I'm not a profound person, but it seemed like that might be the place to start. And she said, after a bit, yeah, I think I'd be willing to get help. And I said, well, how about your husband? I don't know. I guess we could talk about it. And so I gave her the name of a really good counselor, and then I said, I can get a place that can help deal with some of the anger issues that you guys are dealing with. And if you'd be willing to do that, I'm pretty sure you can get through this. And about 6 months later, Connie met me with me, and she had all this joy, and she's like, oh, things have been better than they have ever been. Get a little help. I'm going to tell you, when you choose to deal with conflict the way Paul and Jesus tell us to deal with it, you will have joy in your life because you're not being oppressed by the conflict, you're dealing with it. And in my experience, even when the other person doesn't want to deal with it, you will still have joy because you're obedient. The excuse, well, they don't want to deal with it. Last week, I approached somebody about a conflict because it was bothering me. And I was, nobody likes to deal with conflict, so I was putting it off. Finally, the Spirit was like, you got it. You're you're going to be preaching on this. So I went to the person immediately. Now, they haven't responded. But immediately, the release. Because I'm obeyed. I've done what I'm supposed to do. You will experience joy when you obey God. So there's the first thing. Adversity in conflict. There's a way to deal with conflict. And you can have joy in conflict if you're willing to trust Jesus and deal with it like he says. What is important? Who can I get to help? Now, the second thing he deals with is, many of you are familiar with this, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Really, Paul? Always? I'm going to say it again because I don't think you believe me. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. Don't be all frustrated and angry. Be gentle and calm. Let it be evident to all. Why, Paul? How can I do this? Now, he's going to deal with the second adversity called anxiety. Again, I'm convinced that anxiety is rampant in our culture and in our lives. I mean, think about the things we are anxious about, we don't have answers to. What about a bad health report? What's going to happen with that? That causes anxiety. What about our kids? Are they going to be okay? They're in school. They're being bullied. They're learning stuff. Teachers are pouring stuff. Are they going to be okay? What about my job? Things are uncertain right now. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a job. What about the bills that come with it? What about my marriage? We're struggling right now. A lot of anxiety with that. What about my family's health? My parents, my in-laws? What's going on there? How are we going to take care of them? How are we going to? What am I going to do in the future? I kind of don't know where to go and what to do, and I'm in this no man's land, and I just feel anxiety about it. And what about that conflict I'm in? That's just causing me anxiety. Anxiety is common in our lives. I don't know. You would be an unusual person if you can get through life without anxiety. Paul says, rejoice. Why? The Lord is near, so don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, give your request to God. And when you go through this, the peace of God that transcends, goes beyond all understanding. Doesn't make sense. Will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So I was a Christian for 2 years. I had come to Christ in about grade 12, and then my friend said, you should go to Bible school, so I did with them. I was in Peterborough going to Bible school. It was about this time of year. It was dark. It had been long. I was kind of low on money. I wasn't sure what was going to happen in the next semester. My family was all in PEI. I was up here. I felt that loneliness. I was just struggling with where I was in life and what was going to happen and why was I even here. I was a year and a half old in the Lord. Like what's going on in my life? And I just had this heaviness, this anxiety that was just weighing on me. It was ruining. I was carrying it around for days. I was ready to just go home. And then I was reading a commentary on the book of Philippians because we were studying the book of Philippians, and the commentator was going through these verses, and he said, this is what you need to do when you feel anxiety. And I'm like, well, I'm feeling anxiety. Maybe I should do this. And so the first thing is the Lord is near. He said, recognize that God is present. And when you understand God's presence, you understand that wherever God is present, he helps. God does not walk with us in our lives to watch us spiral downward and get whomped. God says, I'm with you, so you know that he is near and he is helping, even if you can't see. And I'm like, I kind of lost sight of God. I'm like, okay. So I meditated on that and I prayed about that. And then it says, be thankful in every situation, the good, the bad, the hard, the easy. In every situation, those that are causing you, even those that are causing you that anxiety in your spirit, in every one of those situations, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. So first start with thanksgiving. And so I'm like, okay, what do I got to be thankful about? I mean, I kind of hate my life right now. And so I had to start looking. Well, I'm thankful that I ate today, and I'm thankful that I have a room to stay, and I'm thankful for the friends. I'm thankful that I'm learning the Bible. I'm thankful that I live in a nice town. I'm thankful that you have paid all my bills up until now. And I just started trying to think of things I could be thankful. And I was just being thankful for the many things that were in my life that I'd forgotten about because all my focus was on what was causing me anxiety. And I remembered as, oh God, you're near and you have been meeting my needs. You have been working in my life. You have been providing for me. Yeah, I've kind of forgotten about that. And then I next I take all my requests. And so I began, Lord, I'm not sure I've got enough money for next year, but you're the God that can provide all things. You're near, you know that. I'm going to trust you to provide for it. And I'm not sure I have the emotional energy to take this being alone all the time. And so I'm going to trust you to get me through this. And I just went through each thing that was causing me anxiety in my life, and I put it at his feet, and I said, I'm going to trust you. 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 And then and I remember sitting by, okay, I did it all, and I still don't feel that peace. And then in that moment, the peace of God began to pour into my soul. I was like, honestly, because I'm a year and a half old in Christ, right? Like I never experienced this before. I'm like, oh, what is going on here? Like I got this, I feel like a warmth inside and a peace. Like all the things I was worried about are kind of going away. Like, is this real? Like, am I having some sort of psychological problem right now? Like, am I denying everything? And I was trying to parse it until I came back to this, and the peace of God, which trans all understanding, will guard your heart and mind. And it did. Now, I've gone back to this verse many times because, like you, I have anxiety in my life over certain things that happen. I have to keep coming back and get this gift of peace. And that's what Paul is saying. In your anxiety, in the things that you're struggling with in life, remember first God is with you. Focus on that. Then thank him for all that he has done in your life. Because the only thing going on in your life isn't the thing causing you anxiety. It's the one you may be focused on. But there's a lot of other things that God has done in your life. And then lay those requests and you labor in prayer till you get the peace of God. Because it's a promise. Now, I don't know if any of you need peace. But there's how you get it. There's how you get it. In the midst of adversity, you can have peace, and with it will come joy. And I find that sometimes the anxiety of the issue is so intense, I have to go through this process several times a day. It's not because his peace isn't lasting. It's because my faith starts wavering. And so I have to come back. So the adversity of conflict, the adversity of anxiety. Well, let me just comment on verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on such things. Usually we quote that verse totally taken out of the context. The context is you're in anxiety and your mind is focused on all these problems and all these struggles. And Paul says, no, take your mind and focus it on Jesus, his presence, thank him for what he's doing in your life and what he has done in your life, and then lay those requests. And now keep your mind focused on the good things of God, who he is and what he's doing, his presence. Keep your mind thinking on those good things. That's where that verse fits into this process. It's a battle in our mind. It's a battle in our mind. Finally, Paul says anxiety or adversity in our needs. Verse 10, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or want, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So he's learned the secret. So Paul says, I want to thank you for your gift. But then he quickly says, now, I'm not saying that to pressure you to give more, because it doesn't matter if you give the gift or not. I have learned how to live when I have a lot and when I have little. I have learned if my life is in abundance or I can barely eat that day. I've learned to be content in those situations. I have learned the secret of contentment. Well, aren't you going to share the secret with us? Well, he does. He says it at the very end. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. That's the secret. He believes, Paul believes, that it doesn't matter what situation I am in, that if I rely on Jesus, I'll get through. That's the secret. When I've got very little and I don't have the finances I need and the pressures of those finances, I rely on him, he'll get me through. When I've got a lot, I rely on him to know what to do with it. I just rely on him. That's the secret to my contentment. I'm just always relying on Jesus. I'm always calling out to him and giving him my circumstances. Now, this is a reality, I think, because we all have needs, even in our world where that's obvious. Even among Canadians, we're among the most blessed. But you know what I found? The more we have to manage, and the more our needs get. Isn't that funny? That's why when we go on mission trips to poorer parts of the world, and we can't get over how, joyful they are. They have nothing when we come back. I hear this all the time. I've said it. Come back and I go, they have nothing, and they're so full of joy. And we have so much, and we don't have joy. Because there is a weightiness to having much. And it can rob the soul of joy because it's a big responsibility, and it's easy to make it all about us. And Paul just says, I've learned to rely on God. It doesn't matter if I've got much, like many of us, or I have very little, like some of us. I've learned to rely on God. And he sees me through. Now, let me go way back into the 1800s. Hudson Taylor, a number of you may recognize that name. Hudson Taylor was a missionary. He was British, and he left England by the call of God to go to China when China was opening up. They were opening up the gospel. But when he arrived in China, all the missionaries were in port cities, in compounds along the coast, because that's where the British controlled everything. So they would live in well-stocked, well-provided-for compounds, living a pretty good life, and so they would live in all the port cities. But there were millions of Chinese men and women and children in the interior, and there were no or very few missionaries in the interior. Because it was the mindset was, well, we'll reach the people on the outskirts here in the port cities, and they'll carry the gospel back in. But the problem was, when people were heading out, they weren't heading back in. They were coming out to the port cities because it was more financially influential there. There was more money there, and so they would come. So they were reaching the people there. Nothing wrong with that. But all Hudson Taylor could see was the millions in the interior that had nobody. And so he did something radical in his time. It seems second nature to us, but for his time, he took off all his British garments and suits, and he put on Chinese wear that they used, the garments that they would use in the interior. He dressed like he was Chinese. That was scandalous in his day. And then not only did he dress like the Chinese, he learned to speak their language. Rather than making the Chinese learn English, he said, I'm going to learn Chinese and I'm going to speak their language. Well, that was scandalous. And then he said, I'm not going to live here anymore in these port cities. I'm going to go live in the interior where it's poor and people live in poverty, and I'm going to live not in a compound. I'm going to live just like they live. And so he left and went in the interior. Now, there are those missiologists that would say the phenomenal growth of the Chinese church that we know today, hundreds of millions of Chinese that are followers of Jesus. One of the key seeds for that was Hudson Taylor, because of his willingness to do things different and sacrifice everything and go live in the interior. Now, here is some of the wisdom. This guy is prolific in his writing, and people still use his quotes. They're so profoundly wise. I pulled a couple I just want us to read. Now, see, he's living out in, where nobody else, no other white people are, alone, trusting for God to provide for him. I am no longer anxious about anything, as I realize that he, Jesus, is able to carry out his will for me. Well, who can stop Jesus, is what he's saying. It doesn't matter where he places me or how he places me. That's for him to decide or to consider, not me. For in the easiest positions, he'll give grace. And in the most difficult ones, his grace is sufficient. It doesn't matter where you find yourself or what situation you're in or what you're facing. He's able. And his grace is sufficient for you if you will rely on it. There's the sticker. Here's the second quote I pulled of his. Many Christians estimate difficulties in the light of their own resources. Well, this is a really difficult task. I don't know if we can do it. And thus they attempt little and often fail in the little they attempt. All God's giants have been weak men and women who did great things for God because they reckoned on his power and presence with them and not their own. Isn't that interesting? When we focus on what we can do, and that's why I keep encouraging you to be part of the prayer movement of our church, because that is where we are saying, God, we are not enough. How could we reach Stouffville, let alone York Region, Markham and Richmond Hill and Aurora and Newmarket and Oxford? How are we going to reach the hundreds of thousands of people surrounding? How are we going to reach any of them if God doesn't move? It's impossible for us. But with God, he can do things that weak people like us could never imagine. He makes stuff happen that we could never imagine if we rely on him and call on him. The position that you were in and the circumstances you were in are not a surprise to God. In fact, I would say he put you there. You are there. He knows you are there. He knows what you need. Now trust in him and wait. Wait for what he will do, because he is near and you can count on him. Out of this kind of thinking came Paul wrote one of his famous verses, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Isn't that cool? Because he learned to rely on Christ, and by the way, I mean the word learned. He learned to rely. It wasn't like, oh, okay, I'm going to now all of a sudden be always relying on Christ. We learn it through the circumstances we're in. We get better and better at it as we go along. And because he followed that pursuit of learning to rely on Christ, he could say as a testimony, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. It doesn't matter what I've faced, God has got me through it. So I believe anything he brings my way, I'll be able to get through it because I'm going to rely on him. That's where that verse comes from. Isn't it interesting that when our circumstances are good, our happiness is high, but when our circumstances are bad, our happiness disappears. But when our circumstances are good, we can still have joy as long as our faith is full of joy. But when our circumstances get bad, that's when joy really comes out, because when our circumstances are bad, it tells us where our heart is. If I can't get over my circumstances, that means my heart isn't focused on God, or I'm not being obedient to something he's calling to me. I'm not getting the help that I need. It means I'm trying to do it in my own strength, my own way, without relying on God. And so Paul says, have joy, even when things are difficult, because God, Jesus is with you. He is greater than any circumstance you face, and he will bring good from whatever it is you're going through. And when you learn to lean into Jesus and rest in him, you will find that joy, even though your circumstances are difficult. Whether you're in conflict, whether you're rife with anxiety, or deep in need, Jesus is sufficient. And when you lean on him, you will find joy, because your focus is him, not your circumstances or yourself. Let me leave you with one more quote from our friend Hudson Taylor. That final quote. You do not need a great faith, but a faith in a great God. There is a difference. You thinking you need great faith means you've got to manufacture the faith. Jesus says you get a mustard seed of faith, just a little bit, and you put it in a great God. Now that's something. Jesus, help us to walk in that truth. We do not belong to the kingdom of this world. We have God Almighty walking with us, near to us every day. Help us to live in the reality of that and learn to lean into you with our trust, giving you the things causing anxiety and pain and concern and fear, and then walking in obedience to what you call us to. May we be a people of joy. May we be a people who walk not with our eyes on our circumstances, but our eyes on you, trusting you, persevering with you, and having a gentleness rather than an anxiety and a fear and a turbulence to our soul. We call to you to change us from the inside out. In Jesus' name, amen.